All right, I know this isn't the type of video I usually make, but I figure I have a growing platform that I want to energize, and if I really want to kickstart things, I should make a video critical of a beloved IP, something that really annoys people. Let me start with this. I love the show. If you're coming to me for show recommendations, you better believe I'm going to mention The Boys, but Invincible right after. I mean, a compelling, fresh perspective on the superhero genre, a show that isn't afraid to be critical of those with power, a show that balances funny and insightful while also presenting challenging ideas packaged alongside visceral, bloody, well-choreographed fight scenes, a show that puts Superman squarely in the role of the villain, that asks, what does the world do when it has to fight Superman, when the hero that we put our faith in, the defender of the planet, is critically flawed and deeply compromised? What do we do when we have to stand up to that kind of power? I was talking about The Boys again, but Invincible does that too. Okay, I'm serious now. When Invincible came out, I was enamored. A stellar cast of incredible voice actors, a deep cast of characters, a compelling father-son narrative that, spoiler alert, culminates into one of the more memorable animated battles of recent memory. That was Season 1. Season 2 came out recently, and I have some thoughts. As alluded to, Invincible Season 1 explores the challenge of immense power, Omni-Man, from the perspective of his son, Invincible. Invincible has a fraction of Omni-Man's power, and he has reason to be sympathetic to his cause, but he stands up to his father and is punished for it, left bleeding and beaten on a rock. But in his failure, we feel success. A son standing alone in his righteous cause, risking it all for the betterment of humanity. In Season 2, we find Invincible alone on Earth, wondering what's next. With Omni-Man gone, Invincible is now the most destructive and powerful force on the planet, which leads into the conflict of the season. What makes Invincible different from Omni-Man, if anything? The primary question of the season is Invincible any different from his dad? Left in the same position, will he make unique choices, or will he inadvertently slump into the same role and repeat the sins of the father? How do I know this is what the show is asking? Well, I have a very high level of media literacy. I can read between the lines.
I don't need your permission to be a superhero.
You know who else said that to me?
I'm not my dad.
Alright, so maybe they weren't trying to hide it, but my complaint about the season is in the execution of this conflict. It's not my only complaint, but I don't want to make the video too negative and spend time on smaller things. We can go over them briefly. I think the animation was lackluster at times. I found myself sitting through underwhelming visuals thinking, well, this is just a conversation or a scene to move the plot along. The more well-animated big fight scenes are coming later. But then oftentimes those were slightly underwhelming to me. I also thought the auxiliary narratives weren't as strong as I wanted them to be. Like, there's a sort of love triangle between some characters that I won't get into. Okay, real quick. Immortal, a warrior who has existed throughout time and is now leading the Guardians of the Globe, read Avengers or Justice League, gets into a relationship with Rexplode's ex, Duplicate. Kate, spoiler alert, appears to die, and Immortal, again, a wise, historic, trusted leader, is broken by it. I think we, as the audience, are expected to sympathize with Immortal, but I'm not sure why we would. The only insight we get into the relationship before Kate's death is this brief scene in the locker room that, at the time, is really solely intended to just embarrass Rexplode. Rex is trying to hook up with his ex, and then he finds her on the arms of his captain. It's silly and embarrassing for him, but in no way implies any sort of genuine connection between Immortal and Kate. But when Kate dies, Immortal is completely broken. Immortal even admits that being immortal means he's had dozens of meaningful long-term relationships, but this one damages him more than any other. Why? It's actually an interesting and relevant question in the world of Invincible, because one of the more memorable lines of Season 1 is when Omni-Man is speaking to his wife. As they explore what it means to be all-powerful, because Omni-Man, like Immortal, has been around way longer than one human lifetime, Omni-Man tells his wife that all this time, their whole relationship, she's been nothing more than a pet to him. It's heartbreaking and cruel, but given the circumstances, almost understandable. She exists in a tiny fraction of his life. Why is this not the case for Immortal and Kate? What makes their relationship special? I'd be curious to know, but They don't even really try to answer that question. In contrast, I think Invincible's relationship struggle, facing very similar problems, is actually handled pretty well. Amber is human and has to constantly deal with Invincible being pulled away to save the day. She tries to be okay with it. She tries not to feel slighted, because how could she make Invincible feel guilty for saving the planet? I think this conflict is far more satisfying in its development, and I'll happily compliment the season on that. There is a narrative that falls parallel to that relationship that I think is a little more silly. Invincible and Amber go to college, and a problem that is presented as almost equally challenging as the relationship struggle is Invincible struggling to attend classes. In the same episode, towards the end of the season, when Invincible finally decides to end his relationship, he also decides to stop going to college, and it's treated as like just as heartbreaking, and I'm sorry, but what? Why is he entertaining going to school at all? I mean, I guess I see the conflict of like struggling to feel not normal, to not be able to pursue the same life as everyone around you, but I feel like that conflict was settled pretty much in season 1. We as viewers sympathize with giving up on love because we're not sure if we could do it, and it matters when Invincible makes a final decision. But a decision is not impactful when it's obvious to the viewer. It's obvious that Invincible cannot attend college. He's saving the universe, but I think that's clear, and I'm done with my small complaints. I'm ready for the big one. So to recap, the primary conflict of the show is Invincible's battle with how he feels about his father and what it would take for him not to become his father. I think this is engaging and interesting, and if handled properly, makes sense as the next step for the show. It just didn't end up working for me. Let's talk about conceptually how you should present this conflict for a character, because it is difficult. The biggest sticking point here is you have to convince the audience that Invincible could become Omni-Man. Invincible is the star of the show. He's likable and relatable, and he has to stay that way. So the writers need to find a way to convince us that he's capable of evil without damaging our faith in him so much that we stop rooting for him. Enter Angstrom Levy. Angstrom Levy is our big villain for the season, and he's not my favorite conceptually. He's Rick Sanchez, down to the green portals. He's a scientist who can travel between dimensions and has a secret society of other Levys. Listen, I understand that shows like this take time to animate, so this season was probably written a while ago, plus it's based on an already established comic series, so while I do feel like the whole interdimensional superhero thing is a little played out, I won't harp on that too much. But basically, Levy has seen Invincible join Omni-Man and viciously take over the planet in most of the other dimensions. So the group overall sees him as a bad guy. So when all the Levys collapse into one, it doesn't matter that they land in a universe where Invincible is good, he views him as inherently evil. This is the show's big attempt at telling us, hey, Invincible's capable of evil. And while I don't think it's terrible as a piece of the puzzle, it's also not entirely satisfying on its own, and I get the feeling the writers thought it was. There's a general rule in writing called show don't tell. I'm sure you've never heard of it. I'm a fucking genius. But in general, it just means that it's better to convey a concept through events and character choices rather than just telling your audience how to feel. This video was almost about the new Avatar: The Last Airbender live-action series, which I think fails at this concept way more directly. But I felt like that show took enough of a beating anyways, and I think my criticisms of Invincible are a little more subtle and interesting anyways. Invincible doesn't directly fail to meet the standard. I mean, technically they're showing us what Invincible can do. It's not like Invincible is just saying, I'm evil now, but I think the message behind show don't tell is a little more nuanced than that. The whole point of it is you want the viewer to discover the message. Whatever point you're trying to make should be baked into the show, not written on top. You should have to consume and engage with the content matter to understand what the show means. When we're just shown montages of Invincible being Hitler, I feel like I'm being told what to think. It's basically just saying, hey, if you were wondering whether or not Invincible's capable of evil, he is, so don't wonder about that anymore. That's not very satisfying. Take a show like Breaking Bad. Now, obviously, this is one of the most well-written shows ever, so I don't expect any other show to live up to its nuanced character development. I just think it's a show enough people have seen that does the concept well. People to this day are still debating how they feel about its characters. Is Jesse justified in his engagement with evil? Is Mike, is Saul, is Skylar? Even Walt, who, without spoiling too much, is evil incarnate at many points in the show, forces us to say that to ourselves. The show provides every justification to Walt. He's fighting for his family. He's a failure in a broken system who's taking his abilities and using them to maintain pride and wealth. Maybe anyone would do what he does. You're forced to empathize with him, and you have to overcome that empathy yourself and say, no, I, the viewer, disavow his actions. I cast judgment on this character. It's satisfying storytelling. It's a narrative that's worth your time. Invincible, in this season at least, doesn't really grant you that. Now, there are other moments that do it a little better. There are times when Invincible disobeys orders for reasons that we empathize with, but then other characters will say, hey, that's the kind of thing your dad would say. That is much more interesting. Now we're on Invincible's side, but we still have to judge his actions. We have to fear what he may become, as reasonable as he may seem. The problem is, none of these actions are anywhere near the atrocities that Omni-Man commits. Disobeying orders to spend more time with your girlfriend or save an alien race doesn't really put you any closer to Omni-Man. The show fails to bridge that gap. We never see Invincible make a decision so risky that he's anything like his dad. And yes, I'm including the last episode. That wasn't that bad. So instead, they jump the gap with alternate universes. They basically admit, all right, fine, we can't convince you that Invincible is capable of evil, so he is. Look. Now, to be fair, I don't know what the answer is. It is incredibly difficult to write a relatable, strong protagonist who is also capable of great evil. I don't envy it. Like I said, Breaking Bad does it spectacularly, and that, among other things, led to it being one of the most respected shows of all time. It's not an easy task. So I'm not writing off Invincible. I have faith in the show. I'll be around for season 3. I just felt a little disappointed and inclined to chat about it with you Melee enjoyers. Bye. Okay, so I just finished filming that like 30 minutes ago, and I've been thinking, and there's a couple things I want to add to what I said. That last part was like a full script, and this part is a little more off the top of the dome, just so you know. Okay, for one, the final fight scene, which I said wasn't very satisfying in terms of Invincible being like Omni-Man, I could see it being more satisfying if you felt like the conflict of the season was how strong can Invincible be when he really lets loose, when he's willing to kill, which is fair. I think they did kind of develop that throughout the season, and it does answer that question far more satisfying than my question. I just, in my own personal reading of the season, I didn't see that as like that core of a conflict, but I understand if you did. And second thing is, I can imagine that a criticism of this video would be, well, listen, the whole show is about Invincible being like Omni-Man. It's you're not going to answer that in season 2. You're going to build on it a little bit, and then it's going to keep going. To which I would say, well, no, they answered that question. They showed us the alternate universes. We now know that Invincible is capable of being just as evil as Omni-Man. It's done and answered. So it would be equally unsatisfying in future seasons if he continues to slowly, kind of creep. Oh, am I like Omni-Man? Am I not? No, we know you are. You answered that for us. You did. You jumped that gun. So I think that's more my complaint, is that that was the conflict of the season. They did answer the question. I didn't like how they answered it. Okay, so that's my little addendum. Thanks.